verdict is in. 270 to 282 for the NDA, 230 to 240 for the BJP. The best performance ever. It's going to be a huge setback for the Congress party, which is headed for its worst performance. It looks like Narendra Modi is all set to hit 7 racecourse road. Sunil Munjal, let me ask you about specifics now. As far as the disinvestment program is concerned, which was big on the agenda of the UPA, some would say perhaps not for the right reasons, but do you really see this government moving ahead as far as disinvestment is concerned? Because the sense we get is it's not going to be a priority. That's number one. On crucial reforms like insurance, for instance, where the BJP has been clear it wants the cap to remain at 26%, do you believe that there will be a rethink on insurance? Do you believe that despite the noises that have been made and the promises that have been made on retail, we're not actually going to see them do a U-turn? On these 3 specific issues, I want to get your comments in, sir.
Certainly. On the retail, I don't think they will push for retail policy to change. I think they will continue to allow FDI in retail. On insurance, I think they will have to do a rethink. If you just look at the total funding required in this country to increase insurance penetration, we don't have that funding available. Also, it just doesn't bring money, it also brings knowledge and technology. I think they will make that change, but they will need to be convinced that it's necessary. What was the third one you asked?
As far as disinvestment is concerned, do you see them prioritizing disinvestment?
Unfortunately, it's not been on the top of their agenda, and I agree with you there. But I think when they do the maths, it is quite clear disinvestment will have to move up in priority. Let me just give you a quick recap of the earlier question you'd asked. I think they need to focus on continuing the good policies that last government had, and trying again for some of the good ones which did not work, and taking tough steps in the very early days while the honeymoon period is on to try and make changes which are necessary at this moment. I think they would get accepted easier. They also need to empower the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats have not really been functioning over the last couple of years for fear of action against them, even with good intention. I think they need to create that time-tested policy of distinction between mala fide and bona fide action by the bureaucracy. You need to clamp down only if there's malintent. And I also think they need quickly to move on focusing on strengthening the federal structure. I think these 5 are absolutely essential for them as they move forward, because this is the kind of governance they've been talking about. Specifically, Mr. Modi had said little government, much better
and
governance.
More governance.
And it can only happen if you focus on all of these.
Rajiv Chandrasekhar, since we are talking about the issue of governance, let me ask you, through the tenure of the UPA, decision-making has been left to empowered group of ministers or group of ministers, which has largely led to the kind of paralysis that we saw. Do you believe that we're going to be moving away from that, or do you think that is the way going forward as well?
I think you're asking me questions beyond my pay grade, Shireen. I don't know. I think what we need, apart from quibbling about whether it should be a committee or a minister, I think it's about having public policy that is formulated more transparently. There is much more consultation around public policy formulation. It is not aimed at helping one particular company or a group of companies. I think that is the culture that we need to see out of this new government. Now, whether it is a cabinet committee or a single minister that is spearheading the public policy, I don't have a particular view on it. I'm sorry.
Let me ask you this, Rajiv, and you've done a lot of work in Parliament on this issue. The issue of bank licenses, we've given out 2 in-principle approvals, but do you believe that we are going to see the Reserve Bank, along with the government, step on the process of issuing more bank licenses and giving licenses to corporate houses?
No, I am not an expert on the subject, but I mean, I sit on the Standing Committee on Finance, and I've heard
hence I asked you.
Fairly wise, and wise and experienced people like Jashwant Sinha speak on the subject, and I think he has spoken, and so has the RBI governor. I don't think banking licenses to corporates in India is a good idea, especially since regulation of our banks is still very, very poor. You see what is happening on NPAs, you see how promoters are getting away with personal guaranteed loans. You see instances where banks are completely getting run to the ground by, a concentration of borrowing and lending. And I think we can safely assume that the financial sector in India needs a lot more work before we unleash the spectacle of Indian corporates running banks. So that's my sort of take on it. Obviously, the new government will have its own views.
Meera Sanyal, I'm going to ask you to wear your former banker's hat, and everyone's been talking about reviving investor confidence, investor sentiment, stepping on the gas as far as the reform agenda is concerned. What would you like to see from the next government in terms of reform, in terms of continuity of reforms, and in terms of new ideas to bring about growth?
I'd say broadly three things, Shireen. The first is I'd like to see whichever government comes into place to start rebuilding and upholding the integrity of our institutions. I think one of the biggest failures of the Congress and the UPA government was that every single institution of ours was systematically eroded. And unfortunately, I think the steps of the BJP recently in attacking the EC haven't necessarily given us comfort. But I think this is something that all of us would like to see, whether it's the CAG, whether it's the CEC, whether it's the police or the armed forces or the judiciary. We need to see the government starting to uphold our institutions. I think that's very, very important for our country, for our economy, for our democracy. The second is with relation to personal liberties. And I would say that I would like to see this government taking a more tolerant and liberal view, for example, in matters like Section 377, but also in terms of the application of technology, for example, in the social media. I don't know whether you've experienced it, Shireen, but I certainly have. You cannot issue a tweet without the army of BJP trolls descending on you in seconds. And if this is a sign of things to come, if this is a sign of things, well, you speak to character, Shireen, and if this is a sign of things to come, I think we all need to be very, very worried about this government. I certainly am. And the third thing that I would like to see is in terms of execution. Now, the one thing that Mr. Modi is famous for is execution. And I would like to see this government, if they do come to power, to focus on simple things, on toilets across the country, where, by the way, unfortunately, Gujarat has a poor track record. I know as a woman, and I've stayed in many of these villages with women, I know how, what a loss of dignity there is. On houses, we're talking about a country where we've got, missions to Mars. Let's focus on, in the next 5 years, giving every single Indian a home.
It's in the BJP's manifesto and the Congress's manifesto.
And so we'd like to see execution.
Schemes. Yeah, absolutely.